Thank you. So I'm not going to talk about Kubernetes itself. I'm going to talk about Kubernetes on-premise storage options. I will explain immediately. But coming here on this stage, I realized that in my presentation there is a huge mistake. There is no word customer. So I'm going to talk about technical points. I'm going to have some screenshots on terminal and commands. So I hope I'm not going to bore you all. I hope some of you are technical people. Let's proceed. Okay, so this is me. I'm Viorel Angel, Head of Cloud and Infrastructure at eSolutions. You know, when you work for 20 years in IT, you say, I work for more than 20 years so that you don't feel you are old, but this is the way. I'm passionate about Linux and distributed systems like Kubernetes, Kafka, Cassandra, MineIO. I even taught courses on some of those. And of course, I have some certification. They doesn't matter very much. What is important is what you know. Somehow, like the previous presenter, I'm going to show you a story, our evolution in company from 2018. We were using Docker and microservices. Somehow we started with this very early. We were using Rancher as container orchestration system. I don't know, nowadays this is a very small project, but it's somehow similar with Kubernetes as functionality. And as a storage options, we had GlusterFS run on virtual machines, and PostgreSQL also run in virtual machine replicated. Then in that year, Kubernetes started to become more and more popular, and we decided that we have to jump in this wagon and do something about it. Okay, so our first experiment, we installed Kubernetes on-premise, and if you don't know, if you use Kubernetes only on cloud setups, you will see that it's very easy in cloud. Click, create cluster, and that's all. On-premise is not that easy, and you will have to, beside the installation itself, you will have at least two problems. You will have to decide about networking, and you have to decide about storage, which are the two biggest, most problems in any clustering system, probably. So we had the surprise to see that on our first install in Kubernetes, there was no storage class. So basically, you could not create volumes in that Kubernetes. But of course, you could use outside VMs and something like this. So somehow you could live with that. Sorry. Okay, so we started to investigate options. What do we do with storage in Kubernetes on-premise? And because we had previous experience with GlusterFS in virtual machines, we tried first this. We searched. There was a project called Heketi, which did GlusterFS in Kubernetes. Unfortunately, that project was dead or almost dying. It was an open source project, but not very well maintained. So we realized pretty quick that we'll have to give up this path with Gluster in Kubernetes. Another option was Longhorn, which was near to us because it was a project by the same developers as our orchestration system, as Rancher. And here things were very good. It was an active project, product very easy to install and upgrade, and we still use Longhorn today. It gets better and better with every release. How does Longhorn work? Or for that matter, how does any distributed storage system in Kubernetes work? So basically, the system is using some storage on the worker nodes. In the Longhorn case, that is a simple directory. In other storage systems, it may require a dedicated block device. But for Longhorn, that is a directory by default var lib Longhorn. It could be remapped. And the storage system will run at least a pod on every node. Think at daemon set in Kubernetes. And it will distribute and replicate the storage over the nodes. Usually, those systems are using a replication factor 3 for high availability. Okay, this is a slide. Basically, it's trying to show how the Longhorn works. It's not very relevant. It's too deep. So basically, you have a pod, a volume, and those engine and replicas are pods running on a node until they reach the storage for the node. Where does Longhorn shine? I mean, it is very good. So for us, the fact that it's based on directory and not on block storage on node was an advantage initially because it was very easy to install. Then it is very easy to upgrade. It has upgrade in place on the fly, so basically you don't need to do something like we back up everything, we upgrade the storage system, we restore everything, something like this. And it also has a web interface, which is not necessarily very important for me. I am a fan of command line interface, but it's good for other colleagues or for looking at how the status of the system is. Okay, so other than Longhorn, it is important to note that there are many alternatives. There are many open source projects, free and open source, which are doing storage in Kubernetes. Some of them at which we looked at that time are Ceph. Ceph is distributed storage for servers and VM, somehow similar with GlusterFS. And it has a Kubernetes option via a project called Rook. I didn't like Ceph very much because at that time I found out that it's very difficult to resize the Ceph volumes. I don't know if nowadays it's easier to do this operation, but for us it was very important. Also, it is based on block devices attached to the nodes, so it's a bit more difficult to install and set up initially. Another project is OpenEBS. The name comes from Open Enterprise Storage something, an interesting project. After reading the documentation, it seems to me that is overly complicated. It's very difficult to understand what is happening in there. I don't know, probably to justify the enterprise naming as a joke. But anyway, it's an interesting project. So all in all, we started to use Longhorn, and we started to use Longhorn first just using it for file, but in the end we using Longhorn for databases. So we switched from the central Postgres database run in VMs and replicated to many small databases running Kubernetes, each project with its own database. Okay, we started to install PostgreSQL in Kubernetes with Helm using the Bitnami charts, which are very famous in the community, very good, probably the best Helm charts available. And then we went through several operators, Crunchy, Zalando, investigating options. Right now we are using CNPG, which is a project, the name came from the cloud native Postgres operator. It's a operator which I think was launched last year at KubeCon. It's led, I think, by Enterprise DB, so there are some guys which are, they know what is PostgreSQL, and it's a very live and good project. Okay, this switch from a central Postgres database to many small databases running in Kubernetes was fine for a while. until we started to detect some performance problems with those databases, now small and many. Obviously, we as DevOps first blame the developers. Because now with dozens of small databases in Kubernetes, developers create them without any supervision from the DevOps team, without optimization, without paying too much attention to them. So we say, okay, the developers don't know how to make databases. We'll do some performance tuning, we'll do optimization. We started to do that without much success. I mean, there were some improvements, but not relevant. So we realized that it was difficult for us to accept the reality, which is that the direct attached storage is way faster than the network storage. So we switched from the central Postgres, which had the direct storage. So at least in our case, we are poor and we have 1 gigabit network and the SSD drives. So the disks are way faster than the network. Okay. Also, another problems we realized a bit later was that we are using many applications which handle the data replication by themselves, like replicated Postgres, Kafka, Zookeeper, Cassandra, and others. Running those in Kubernetes with Longhorn storage is slow because, first, Longhorn is going to write over the network, not on local disk. Second, Longhorn does volume replication over the network. And third, you will realize that you have 9-time replication, because if the application is going to replicate data at the data level 3 times, and that data is in volumes which are themselves replicated 3 times by the Longhorn, you have 9-time replication, which is not necessarily what you want. Okay, so first part about that, the fact the Longhorn writes over network is somehow solved in the latest version from Longhorn, which is providing a best effort option to data locality, and it will try to keep a replica on the same node with the pod using it. So somehow the problem is minimized. For the last point with 9-time replication, you could try to define a storage class in Longhorn with replication factor 1 instead of 3. This is not exactly how Longhorn is designed to work, but it will work, and we tried this and did some experiments. The problem here is that it makes Longhorn harder to maintain, because Longhorn is no longer able to self-heal the volumes when you have problems and so on. You have to manually resolve such problems. So because of maintenance problem, it wasn't a great success for us. That being said, we have decided to search for a storage solution in Kubernetes, a solution for storage in Kubernetes to use local disks. So, because at the same time we were researching MinIO as an on-premise alternative for AWS S3 object storage, we came across DirectPV from the MinIO developers. DirectPV is a storage class for Kubernetes for direct attached storage, and can be used when running MinIO in Kubernetes, but also it can be installed independently by MinIO, so you can use it for anything you really wish. As for Longhorn, we also investigated some options here. There are, for example, Rancher Local Path Provisioner and OpenEBS Local PV, two direct competitors to DirectPV. But both those options doesn't seem very production-oriented. So, for example, on both, the storage size option for persistent volume claim is not enforced. So basically, you could declare a persistent volume claim of 1 gigabyte storage, and you can write in it whatever you wish. So you can surpass that size. On the other hand, DirectPV being used by MinIO by default, it means that it's very reliable, and this is a strong argument pro. This is an example with both storage classes, Longhorn and DirectPV. This is the result of the command kubectl get storage classes. And what is somehow interesting here is that column volume binding mode, in which you will see for DirectPV wait for first consumer. This was quite a surprise for us at the beginning. Even if you thought a little bit, it's clear what is happening. So, okay. So basically what is happening is that when you try to create a simple persistent volume claim, on Longhorn, the volume is created immediately. On DirectPV, when you try to create this, the persistent volume claim will remain in a state pending, and will stay in that situation until the pod, at least the pod using it, is scheduled on a node. So only then the persistent volume will be created on that node and bound to the PVC. This behavior is absolutely normal if you think, but it can be a bit confusing when you see it for the first time. You create PVC and you see pending, maybe something is wrong, but there's nothing wrong. You need the pod to consume that PVC. Okay, now about the speed test. There are many tools to do speed test for disk, but I prefer the simple one, so we started with the classic DD. This is an utility which has existed on Linux and Unix since forever. It means disk dupe, and basically it will copy a block of disks. So you could run a simple speed test like this. DD, if means input file, dev0 is a virtual file on Linux which is providing a continuous stream of 0 bytes. Of means output file in a temporary file, block size 1 mega, count 100 blocks. So basically we'll produce with this command a file of 100 megabytes. The most important one is off-flag, that option, which means from output flag, direct, which basically instruct the Linux kernel and the file system not to do any caching. So this command is trying to provide the raw disk speed. A similar command can be written with e-flag for input if you want to test the speed for reading. Okay, so very small, but I will tell you what is happening here. These are the results. We have a pod in which we have a volume for each of the storage class in which we run that command. And basically, DirectPV is 10 times faster for disk writes than Longhorn. Of course, this depends on the speed of the disk, on the speed of the network, and so on. But being 10 times, it is clear that it will cause a performance problem. On the reads, the difference is only 10x. So this is somehow confirming that what we know, that the direct storage is faster than writes over the network. Okay, how do we benchmark a database? Because this speed is one, what is doing the database is somehow different. In our case, fortunately, we have an utility directly from PostgreSQL. So we can test it with this command called pgbench. The first command, get cluster, is specifically to what operator you are using. In our case, we are using it to detect which of the pod is the Postgres master. Then we enter in that pod, and we run for pgbench. You need two commands. One is pgbench-i to initialize the tables required by the utility, and then something like pgbench-c10. It means simulating 10 clients at a time, -t60, for example, to run a test with 10 clients for 60 seconds. This is a very simple command. What is important to note here is that you could write your own test for PGBench. So it has some defaults, battery of select, test, whatever, but you could write your own test. The results were something like transaction per second 145 and 240, which is a plus of 66%. For the two storage classes, quite obvious which one is speedier. The difference is no longer 10x, but this is normal because PGBench is not running only writes, it's running also select, which is reads for once, and the second, you could not disable the caching in PGBench, so the database will do heavy caching. Okay. Also, those tests in PGBench, they are running, I don't know, 5 select and 1 insert, something like this. There is a proportion between selects and inserts. And if you wish, you could write your own test matching the proportion in your application to have a clear, better numbers for this situation. But for our simple experiments, we consider that this is good enough. So, as expected, DirectPV is faster than Longhorn, and probably we knew this upfront, but what do we do in case of failures? So this is a huge problem. And first, it's best to start listing which kind of failures we could have for pods using storage in Kubernetes. So we could have the classical and typical no special left on device or disk full. We could have a pod explicitly deleted by the user. There are cases in which you want this. We could have a readiness probe failure. We could have a liveness probe failure. You should know the difference between those. And you could have a worker not drained and the worker not down, or worker not ready in the technical Kubernetes terminology. There is a quite small difference between those, because not drain means you did that action, you did the drain. The other one is an unexpected condition. So it may be different. Okay. Now, regarding the first case, no space left on device, I want to make a small note here, because this is probably the most common problem on storage everywhere, not only in Kubernetes. Prometheus has predictive monitoring since 2015, and that predictive monitoring works very well for this space. This means that instead of having alert like warning this space for X is as 85% or critical alert to disk space is at 90%, it's better to have alert like this space for whatever will fill up in 2 days. This giving you an option and a time frame in which you could prevent the problem. So it's better to have alerts like this which do predictive monitoring. Okay. Now about the real failure cases. Failures when using Longhorn are easier to be handled because Longhorn is using by default a replication factor 3, so the volume is replicated on 3 nodes. If one of the nodes is down, there are still 2 replicas on the other nodes, and basically the failure won't be visible to clients. Also, the Longhorn will try to repair the problem by creating another replica. When using DirectPV, if a worker node is down and a volume located on that node, the volume located on that node will be obviously unavailable. So the pod using that volume will transition into the state terminating, but it will be stuck in that state until we manually delete the PVC and the pod, or the node recovers. Even better, in the case of operators like Postgres operator, the operators will try to automatically handle some of the failure. So if this is not happening, the previous solution, delete PVC plus pod, and wait for the operator to recreate, this worked fine in our experiments. And as a side note, you can delete the PVC and the pod with a single command, and this is important to do it like this, because if you try to delete only one, the command may be stuck. Obviously, before deleting anything, it could help to have backups. And not only that, it could help to have restores, because backups anyone has backups, but restore, not really clear. Okay, so I am almost reaching the final part of my presentation. I forgot to talk about MinIO. I will talk a few words about MinIO. MinIO is great. It's an object storage for on-premise, modeled after AWS S3. It has great scalability and high availability. And for the moment, we are using MinIO in a cluster outside Kubernetes on VMs. We still investigating. We plan to run it. It's not very clear if on Kubernetes or on bare metal. In my opinion, it's on one of those rare products nowadays which they deserve to be run on bare metal. You can run MinIO in Kubernetes or even in Docker, but I see no advantages in doing that except as a playground or for doing experiments or learning. Okay. So basically, this is all I have, which means that we'll have more time to discuss. This is where we started with Docker and the GlusterFS and basically all the storage centralized outside our microservices. And then now we are running Kubernetes, mostly on-premise, some options in cloud. We are using everywhere Longhorn with replication factor 3 as the default storage class. We are migrating some of the replicated apps, some of the replicated workloads to DirectPV for performance. And we are experimenting with MinIO object storage, which is, in my opinion, the future default storage for everything, for backups and also for live data. This is not my picture, so thank you.
Thank you. So, questions? Come on, questions. Avem aici o întrebare, so please.
Thank you. I was interested to know for which kind of application is this infrastructure feasible and for which volumes of data? Thank you.
We are using this infrastructure mostly for our internal projects, and I could not say that the volume is at the level of a huge company. But on the other hand, it depends on what we are talking about. Let's say for a storage like Longhorn, we have more than one setup. So we have set up with 20 physical servers. 20 physical servers. A physical server means something like, I don't know, 4 terabytes of data on each server, 256 gigabytes of memory, if that means something. I know it's not at the scale of Adobe or Google Cloud Project, but this is our scale.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have here. Thank you.
Hi. I was wondering, you said that currently the bottleneck would be the network, right?
Yes.
So if you would have had 10 gig networking, would you still use DirectPV?
The answer is yes or no. If I would have 10 gigabyte network, I would prefer to also have NVMe. So, but probably, as I have said, I consider Longhorn to be a good option, and for the moment, it's our primary option. So we are migrating to DirectPV only for specific cases in which we really need, let's say, near bare metal performance. So,
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Another question there. Thank you.
in your tests with Longhorn, did you experience or did you try to simulate a failure of one node to see what is the network impact of renegotiating,
Yes.
moving data around?
There is a networking impact. So Longhorn is going to try to create a new volume, and it will copy that data. It will replicate the data over the volume. So
I would assume that this kind of impact will be in time, like several minutes, depending on the volume size
Yes,
and
of
depending
course.
on the network bandwidth.
depending on how much storage you have in that volume, but basically you could compute it by taking, let's say, the physical speed of the network divided by 2, by assuming that that network is doing other things also, not only replicating the storage.
So basically, the application should cope with that increased network traffic. It also
Yes.
and the volume and the data were available at that time, but maybe the performance was a bit impacted.
Yes,
by-
but to be honest, this is somehow a rare situation, and when it's happening, yeah, you could live with it. I mean, you have some performance impact, but you have the application still running.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? I'm way outside my comfort zone with this speaker, so I'm just thinking what could I ask. So any more questions from you?
You could ask me
Thank you.
about backups.
I'm going to ask the heretical question. Beforehand, you had a cluster of a replicated database, and afterwards you have a cluster with a replicated database and a lot more layers of abstraction.
Yes.
So basically, was it worth it? After all said and done, was it
Okay,
worth it?
nice question. Yes, I think it is worth it, but not necessarily from technical point of view. So from technical point of view, I would prefer to have one single database replicated with database administrator to take care of it, not me. But there is another advantage, small advantage on having many small databases in Kubernetes, and this is that you could give the developers the power to do them by themselves. So we don't need in our company, the developers don't came to the DevOps team and say, okay, we need a new server, we need a new database. No, they are providing and they are creating the database by themselves. Also, another advantage you could see on this, when a new release for a Postgres or whatever else database appear, and there are developers which we want to start using Postgres 15, but there are developers who say, okay, no, we are not ready for this because our application was designed for Postgres 13 version. And we don't know what is happening if we migrate or need time to test and so on. With many small databases, one team could have Postgres 15, one team could have Postgres version 9, and so on. So there are two advantages, in my opinion: speed of development or freedom for developers, and freedom for developers. Both are the same.
Thank you for the question. I owe you one. So no more questions. So what about backups?
Yeah, so about backups, the solution is to have MinIO or to use S3 if you start small and you have enough money. But if you already have an on-premise infrastructure or you have some specific needs to run in on-premise, MinIO is the way to go. And all for instance, our Postgres operator CNTG does support backups over S3 or whatever storage with supports S3 interface, which is MinIO on-premise.
Any other questions from you? I would ask you a more general question. Looking at the future, what do you see? Where do you see the market, the customers going, and which technology do you think are going to prevail?
I like this question. I want to say that it's a paraphrase. I see Kubernetes everywhere. So I think the trend with cloud migration, I won't say it's going to slow down, but there are customers which are realizing that running on-premise has some advantages, and It's not necessarily for all of us to jump in the cloud or to totally jump in the cloud. So there are going to be customers which will appreciate the possibility and the knowledge to stay on premise, which is going to be rare. I mean, we're going to have many cloud engineers and less on-premise Linux experts, because this is all it counts. I mean, the rest, Kubernetes, MinIO, whatever, Kafka, those are details. The base is Linux.
Where would you ask customers to look, which indicators to look at before deciding on-prem versus cloud?
This is a very good question, but I think we have a guy which is going to present today in the afternoon. We'll have a presentation exactly on this topic, how and when to decide and how to decide when to go on the cloud or not. So basically, I will leave Andrei Mana, I think, is the speaker to answer better to this question.
Okay, so let's see if there are no more questions. Thank you very much. Let's give him a round of applause.